Hey guys, tonight we're leaving behind the digital hum of modern life and slipping quietly into a time when your morning alarm wasn't your phone. It was a chicken pecking your toes through a hole in your straw mattress. The year is somewhere in the 1300s, maybe earlier, but don't worry, there are no pop quizzes here. Just mud body odor and the constant presence of livestock. You roll over on a sack stuffed with moldy hay, the pillow poking your cheek like a half-hearted hedgehog. A wooden beam above your head creaks, reminding you that your house is mostly wattle and daub sticks mud, and the occasional desperate patch of cow dung. The thatched roof leaks when it rains. It rained last night. You're damp. There's no real bedroom. You share this space with your spouse, your kids, your mother-in-law, goat, and 2 chickens who strut around like they pay rent. Privacy. That's for lords. You get splinters and body heat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Curious minds want to know. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle out from under the burlap you call a blanket stretch and whack your elbow on a beam. Again. The rooster outside screams like it's being mugged, and that's your cue. It's time to rise and serve the system. Your feet touch the packed dirt floor. It's cold, moist. You think about socks. Then remember, socks aren't really a thing for you. You wrap your feet in scraps of wool if you're lucky, but most days it's just calluses and acceptance. You tug on your one tunic stiff with yesterday's sweat and the faint scent of manure. It's a simple, laced-up thing made of coarse wool, dyed vaguely brownish by onion peels, or maybe despair. Underwear, questionable. Historians still argue whether peasants routinely wore linen braids beneath their tunics, or just let nature do its thing. Either way, modesty is more of a theoretical concept at this point. Outside the air is gray and damp. Smoke from 100 hearth fires hangs like soup in the sky. The village smells like wood-smoked pigs and people who haven't invented deodorant yet. But your nose, blessed, has adapted. You don't smell it anymore unless you visit the abbey, and even then it's just a more refined funk. Your job this morning, survive. That means hauling yourself to the fields to begin your daily routine of bending over for 12 hours and trying not to die. You're what they call a villain, a kind of half-free peasant. You technically belong to the land which belongs to the Lord, who belongs to some distant cousin of the king who has no idea you exist. Your first stop is the village well. Water isn't piped into homes, it's carried sloshed and often spilled all over your tunic. You nod to Agnes, who's already at the well with her baby strapped to her back and another clinging to her leg, both of them sticky with whatever children in the Middle Ages managed to find on the floor. She nods back wordlessly, the kind of tired acknowledgement that says, yes, we are still alive. Barely. Back home, your spouse is lighting the fire with flint and determination. Smoke pours into the room before eventually escaping through the hole in the roof. The kids are already fighting over a heel of stale bread. Breakfast is happening. Meals aren't events. They're obligations. You might eat pottage, a lumpy, watery stew of whatever was growing, sprouting, or crawling in your garden. If it's a lucky day, there's an egg in it. Most mornings, though, it's cold gruel made from oats and the sheer will to stay conscious. The smell is nourishing adjacent. And yet this is comfort food, the kind that fills your belly and reminds you you're still part of this long, muddy narrative we call survival. As you sip your gruel, someone outside shouts about a missing pig. Again. Pigs are clever and essential, which makes them a constant source of stress. They feed you clean-up scraps and escape just for the drama. One of yours got into the churchyard last spring and bit a friar. That was awkward. By mid-morning, you're outside. The fields are slick from last night's rain. You trudge past the manor house, which looks like a palace to you, but would probably be described today as rustic with damp problems. A flag flaps on a crooked pole. The Lord is in today. Working the land is your main job, and it's back-breaking. You plow with an ox and a wooden plowshare that mostly moves dirt and occasionally hits a rock with enough force to make you curse in medieval English. Something like God's wounds if you're feeling bold, or just a long sigh if the priest is nearby. You sow seeds by hand, trying not to think about last year's famine. Crops failed when spring brought late frosts and then floods. That winter, you chewed on boiled nettles and prayed for miracles. You buried 3 neighbors and kept moving. And yet here, you are again bent over the earth like a lowercase Sayar, trusting the soil to feed your family. Historians still debate how much autonomy peasants had in planning their agricultural cycles. Some say they followed communal rhythms dictated by custom. Others argue that the manor imposed strict timetables. Either way, you're not reading almanacs. You're reading the clouds. Lunch is a chunk of dark rye bread and a sliver of cheese that smells like regret. You sit on a stone wall gnawing and watching the sky. A neighbor swears they saw a comet last night and thinks it means war, or maybe just bad weather. Either way, you nod solemnly. Superstition isn't decoration, it's survival logic. You avoid certain trees because they're unlucky. You toss salt over your shoulder if someone sneezes wrong. You once tied a charm made from a rabbit's foot and an old tooth around your child's ankle to ward off coughs. Did it work? Who knows? But she's still breathing. The afternoon stretches out in a rhythm of labor and minor injury. You bruise your thumb with a hammer. You get poked in the eye by a wheat stalk. A bee flies into your tunic. Again. Still there are moments. A bird perches on your shoulder like it owns you. The wind shifts and smells like apples. Someone nearby sings a low, strange tune with no known lyrics. It's the sound of staying alive. Evening creeps in slowly. You gather your tools, your aches, and your meager harvest. Back home dinner is basically breakfast, but slightly warmer. The fire is low, the kids are asleep, and the goat is chewing something it shouldn't. You sit for a moment in silence. The day is done. The sky outside is pink and bruised. Stars begin to poke through. You wonder if tomorrow will bring sun or storms or plague or peace. But that's tomorrow's problem. For now, you pull your itchy blanket over your shoulders and let the dark settle in like an old friend. You wake up to the sound of your stomach complaining again. It's not subtle. It growls like a wolf denied its supper. The air inside the cottage is smoky and still thick with the smell of wood ash, sour wool, and bodies that haven't seen soap since Easter, which, by the way, was 5 months ago. The chickens have already declared war on your straw mattress. One of them pecks at your sleeping foot like it's owed rent. You mutter something unkind under your breath and sit up. Breakfast isn't something to look forward to. It's something to tolerate. You reach for the pot near the hearth, still crusted with last night's pottage. There's a bit left. Lucky you. Your spouse adds a dash of water and a pinch of salt if there's any, and stirs it into a warm slop. You all sit around the fire and pass wooden bowls. No one talks. The children eat like they're afraid it'll vanish mid-spoonful. Gruel. Again. It's made of oats this time, and you try not to chew too hard on the little bits of husk that didn't get boiled down. Sometimes it's barley. Sometimes it's millet if you've somehow struck cereal gold. There's no honeybees or a rich man's luxury. No milk today, either the cow's drying up. Maybe tomorrow. The taste earthy. Charitable folk might call it simple. You call it better than dirt. Barely. You eat it while swatting away flies and watching steam rise from the wooden bowl. You try to savor it, but there's not much to savor. Every now and then you catch yourself daydreaming about roasted meat, or bread that didn't have pebbles baked into it because someone forgot to sift the flour. Bread, by the way, is hit or miss. You might have some coarse rye loaf left over from the baker's oven, but it's hard enough to build a church with. You dunk it in your gruel until it softens. If it doesn't soften, you chew and pray. And speaking of bread, here's a fun tidbit. Sometimes the flour used by peasants contained ergot, a mole that grew on rye in damp conditions. When consumed, it could cause hallucinations, spasms, and even death. Historians still argue whether ergotism played a role in outbreaks of mass hysteria like dancing plagues or accusations of witchcraft. You just know that every now and then someone saw angels in the sky after lunch. After breakfast, you wrap the bread crust in a bit of cloth and tuck it away. It might be lunch if you're lucky, or it might be dinner. Either way, you can't waste it. Waste is a sin, and more importantly, it's expensive. You step outside and stretch. Your knees crack like a church door in winter. You look around the village. Smoke curls from chimneys. People are already at work. You nod at Thomas the Thatcher, who's heading to patch another leaking roof with reed string and prayer. His fingers are wrapped in cloth. He sliced them last week and didn't bother with stitches. He just smeared it with honey and said a few words to St. Jude. You pass a group of children sitting under an old oak, gnawing on wild apples and poking each other with sticks. They're barefoot, bruised and laughing. It's the happiest anyone will be all day. Lunch, if it happens, is on the go. You might boil some cabbage or onions if you brought them with you. More often it's cold porridge or stale bread eaten while sitting on a stone watching crows steal your barley. Once during a bad harvest, you ate boiled nettles and thanked God for them. They sting your fingers but soften when cooked. They're full of iron and self-delusion. There was also that time someone swore turnip leaves were edible. They were wrong. Very wrong. Meat, forget it. You might get some pork on festival days if the village pig is slaughtered. More likely it's salted fish caught last week and soaked in brine so harsh it could strip paint. It flakes apart in your hand and tastes like the bottom of a wooden barrel, which coincidentally is exactly where it came from. Still, it's protein, and it might keep you alive another week. Hunting. Not unless you enjoy punishment. The Lord owns the forest, the deer, the rabbits, even the birds. Poaching is a hanging offense. You've seen it happen. Old Martin tried to snare a hare last spring. They found him swinging from an ash tree 2 days later. The birds got to him first, so you eat what you can grow or gather. Berries, mushrooms, roots you can't quite identify but seem vaguely edible. Agnes the healer swears by ground elder. You think it tastes like regret, but it fills your belly. Sometimes someone finds an eel in the stream. That's a banner day. Slippery little things, but once you wrap them in herbs and roast them over coals, they taste like something you'd pay for if you had coin. You don't. One night, a traveler came through with a sack of spices. Actual spices. Pepper, cloves, and cinnamon. He said he'd been to Constantinople. You didn't believe him, but you bought a pinch of pepper anyway. It cost half a chicken. Worth it, hard to say. The stew that night had an edge. You felt worldly. You also nearly burned your tongue. You sipped from a wooden cup filled with weak ale made from barley yeast and blessedly safe water. Water alone can kill you. Ale at least goes through a boil, and the alcohol keeps your insides from revolting. Even children drink it. There's no shame in that. No hangovers either. There's barely any alcohol in it. Wine is for priests, nobles, the kind of people who don't grow their own onions. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and get back to work. The sun's still high, and the fields aren't going to weed themselves. Afternoon snack, a handful of peas from the pod, or a radish if it hasn't bolted. You chew slowly, pretend it's roast goose, and squint toward the manor house. Inside that stone box, the Lord eats white bread, rich meats and cheeses you've only dreamed of. They have spices, servants' napkins. You have turnips and hope. But let's be fair, rich people have their own problems. Gout for one. They drink too much wine, eat too much red meat, and get inflamed joints. Historians still debate whether the medieval diet made peasants healthier, in some ways less sugar, fewer animal fats, but nobody's exactly thriving out here. Evening comes with a hush. You gather what's left of your meager supplies. You mash some beans into a paste and smear it on bread that's now more stone than loaf. You sip ale and talk softly by the fire. Your spouse hums a song from childhood. One of the kids gnaws on a beet and makes a face. You laugh for the first time today. It's not much, but it's something. In a world where survival is an act of rebellion, dinner is your victory lap. You go to sleep a little hungry. Again. But you've made it through another day. That's enough. The sun isn't even fully up yet, and you're already working land that doesn't belong to you. That's the rhythm of things, your rhythm. You rise, you labor, you give. And everything you give, it goes up the hill to the manor. The Lord owns it all, the fields, the woods, the river where you occasionally pretend not to fish. Even the stone on which you sharpen your hoe. You work it, sure, but it's his. Technically, you belong to him too. You're what's called a villain, not quite a slave, not quite free, just tethered to the land like a stubborn goat on a short rope. So when you trudge into the barley field this morning with the wind cutting across your cheeks and the mud already oozing into your shoes, scratch that your feet, because shoes are for Sunday. You do it not for yourself, but because it's your duty. Today is your labor service day. That means you work the Lord's personal fields instead of your own. He doesn't pay you, not in coin, not in food. He might thank you, but usually he doesn't. You glance up at the manor house sitting smugly on a hill like a cat watching mice fight over crumbs. It's a solid stone structure with 2 chimneys and an actual door that closes properly, luxury in these parts. There's a herb garden up front and a steward who walks like he owns every footstep he takes. The steward's name is Roger. Of course it is. Roger has never lifted a shovel in his life, but he sure knows how to tell you when you're not holding yours correctly. He comes around mid-morning inspecting the peasants. He carries a scroll. On it are your obligations. 33 days a year on the Lord's land. 5 hens at Easter, a tithe of oats, a smile when he insults your hat. Roger doesn't smile back. You swing your hoe and dig into the damp earth. You're planting flax today, not for yourself, but so the Lord's wife can have linens that don't scratch her delicate elbows. Your own tunic feels like it was woven from regret and thistle. Still you plant. Behind you, Edith the widow coughs into her shawl. She lost her husband last winter, and now she owes labor service and a death duty. That's right, when someone in your family dies, you don't just grieve. You pay. Usually the best animal from your herd, which in Edith's case was a goose. Now she's alone, and the Lord still wants eggs. You pause, wiping your brow with the back of your hand. The sun's climbing now, and the sweat starts to roll. A few other villagers nearby are hacking away at a hedgerow, clearing space for a new pasture. They work silently except for the occasional grunt and the universal sound of peasants cursing splinters. You wonder briefly what it would be like to own land. To plant a row of beans and know they belong to you. To sleep under a roof you could repair without asking permission. Historians still argue whether any medieval peasants managed to buy their freedom and land outright. Some say it was possible through sheer will and luck. Others believe that without the church or patron, you are stuck in place. For you, land ownership is a fantasy, like dragons or bread with butter. There are free men in your village, of course, people who own their own cottages and don't have to serve the Lord directly. But even they owe taxes, tithes, and random fees like grazing rights or marriage consent. And let's be honest, they're still planting in the same mud as you. At noon, you're allowed a short break. You sit in the shade of a stunted tree and chew on a cold onion and a crust of bread. Roger walks past again, eyeballing you like he thinks chewing too slowly might be a violation. You think about spitting the onion at him just for fun. You don't. There's a brief commotion near the wheat field. A pig has gotten loose. Again. Pigs are the medieval version of chaos. They break fences, eat anything, and occasionally chase small children. Everyone loves to complain about them. Everyone also wants one. You help corral it back to its pen. In return, the pig bites your ankle. You consider biting it back, but it squeals and waddles away. You limp back to the flax field and get on with it. The thing is, you need this Lord. You may resent him, but without his protection, you're vulnerable. Bandits roam the forests. War can come knocking at any moment. And when famine strikes the Lord's granary, though modest, is still fuller than yours. If you're lucky, he'll open it. If you're unlucky, he'll sell what's inside to merchants heading to France. So you keep your head down and your hands dirty. By the late afternoon, your back is in full revolt. The muscles along your spine sing an angry little ballad. You've planted 2 rows too few, and Roger noticed. He tuts loudly and scribbles something on his scroll. That probably means you'll owe another day's work next week. Fantastic. Still, there are moments of defiance, quiet as breath. You sometimes plant seeds too deep so they grow slower, or you accidentally drop a few in your cloak. You're not stealing, you're surviving. Once you buried a coin under a rock, a single silver penny you found by the stream. You check it sometimes just to feel rich. The day winds down. The sky turns lavender and the air cools. You carry your tools back toward the village shoulders, heavy eyes gritty with dust. A few kids run past you laughing, chasing a chicken with a bit of string tied around its foot. You think about supper. Maybe beans, maybe nettles, maybe dreams. Back home, your spouse is boiling something. The smell is vaguely edible. The children are scraping the last of the stew from yesterday's pot, using bread like spoons. You join them wordless. Afterward, you lie on the straw pile that passes for a bed and stare at the roof. The stars peek through a gap. The wind whistles through the wall. You think of the Lord in his feather-stuffed bed, sipping warm milk, probably dreaming of taxes. You close your eyes and sleep like someone who has nothing and everything to lose. Morning again. Same ache in your neck, same stiff straw under your spine, same goat staring at you like it knows something you don't. You reach for your tunic. It's on the floor where you left it folded if you're the tidy type, but let's be honest, it's more likely crumpled like a dead squirrel. You hold it up. It smells like the fire sweat and a hint of mildew. In short, it smells like you. This is your one outfit, not one of your favorites. Your only one. It's made of coarse wool, scratchy enough to exfoliate your dreams. The color A, kind of gray-brown that once might have had dignity. These days, it just blends with the mud. You put it on, carefully checking for fleas, holes, and other surprises. There's always something. A thorn, a crumb. Once a very sleepy beetle. Underneath you wear your braised linen undershorts, assuming you've been lucky enough to get them washed in the stream recently. If not, you just pray they don't chafe too much. For women, there's a loose-fitting linen garment, though in colder months, folks layer up with whatever they've got. Old cloaks, patched shawls, a squirrel's skin if you're creative. Your shoes, if you have them, are more decorative than useful. They're made of leather, thin as leaves, and usually worn down to flaps. You slip them on and mentally prepare for a day of stepping in everything. Manure puddles pebbles that feel like punishment. You once stepped on a bone. Don't ask. You walk outside and stretch your arms, rising slowly against the morning chill. The air is crisp, but your tunic already traps the scent of your own body. Hygiene at best is a part-time hobby. Bathing. That's a whole event. It means hauling buckets of cold water from the stream, heating it over the fire, and maybe adding herbs like lavender or thyme if you're fancy, or desperate, or being inspected by the priest. You bathe maybe once a month, twice if you're courting someone. Not because you're lazy, because water is work. Firewood is scarce, and people genuinely believe that too much bathing might open the pores and let in disease. So you clean the important parts. Usually, probably. To stay fresh, you might rub rosemary on your skin or wear a sachet of herbs under your tunic. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly stank beyond redemption or whether they simply smelled like their animals and whatever fungus grew in their thatch roof. It's complicated. You make your way to the village square. On the way you pass others in their Sunday best, which incidentally is the same outfit just brushed. Maybe a belt added. Maybe a hat if you're lucky. Or bored. Clothing is practical, stitched by hand, patched repeatedly. You've seen tunics so mended they look like quilted puzzles, but every piece tells a story. That tear on the sleeve caught it climbing over the fence after the harvest festival. That scorch mark too close to the fire last winter. That patch on the shoulder, your child sewed that in secret. You wear it with pride. Accessories a few. Maybe a leather belt, maybe a pouch with a piece of chalk or some dried apple slices. Some wear crude jewelry, bone beads, or wooden crosses. A token from a pilgrimage. A feather, a pin. Fashion isn't about flair, it's about status. You glance at the steward walking past. His cloak is dyed a dull green, not bright, but you can tell it used to be expensive. He wears a leather belt with polished fittings and a pouch that actually closes. Probably has real coins inside. The nerve. Dye is a dead giveaway. Natural dyes exist: onion skins for yellow madder, root for red, woad for blue, but they're labor-intensive. Your tunic was dyed once, probably when the cow was still a calf. Nobles wear vibrant colors: deep blues, rich reds, pure whites. You wear earth tones, mostly because the earth touches you constantly. And then there are the fleas. They're not just in your bed, they're in your seams, your sleeves, your hair. You scratch at your shoulder and catch one with your fingernail. Flick it, miss, welcome to daily maintenance. Lice. Oh, you've got those too. Everyone does. Even the Lord, though he'd never admit it. Some folks shave their heads and wear linen caps soaked in vinegar to keep them at bay. You tried that once. The vinegar got in your eyes. You cried in front of the goats. Speaking of headwear, you pull your coif over your ears. It's a linen cap tied under your chin, protecting your head from the sun, and your scalp from the worst of the grime. It makes you look like a confused mushroom, but it gets the job done. Women might wear wimples covering the neck and chin, or headscarves. Modesty matters. Loose hair is suspicious. Witchy, even. Once a girl let her hair down at market and 3 old women crossed themselves so hard they nearly dislocated their elbows. Laundry day, when it finally comes, is an ordeal. You take everything to the stream, beat it on stones, then hang it to dry on branches. You use ash, yes, literal ash, mixed with water as soap. It sort of works. It also burns your hands and smells like disappointment. You walk past Agnes the healer's cottage and see shirts hanging from her fence posts. They flap in the breeze like pale flags of surrender. She's lucky has a teenage daughter who actually helps with washing. Yours just hides under the cart when laundry is mentioned. You wonder briefly what nobles wear to bed. Probably linen shifts, brushed hair, maybe even slippers. You sleep in whatever you didn't have the energy to take off. Sometimes fully dressed, sometimes half. Once during a fever, you slept in nothing but a blanket and a dream about roasted pheasant. It didn't end well. And yet, despite the filth, the smells, the constant itch, there's something comforting in the familiarity of your clothes. You know every stitch, every fray. You've mended them by firelight. Your spouse added embroidery to the hem, a tiny pattern of stars, because your child once pointed to them and said, "They look like Mama's stitches." It's not much, but it's yours. You return home that evening, your tunic damp with sweat and streaked with whatever the field decided to throw at you. You hang it near the fire. It'll dry. It'll also smell like smoke, but that's an upgrade. You lay back on the straw and scratch your shoulder. The flea is back. You swear it winks at you. You close your eyes anyway, letting the sound of the wind and the crackle of the hearth wash over you. You'll wear the same thing tomorrow, and the next day until it falls apart. And then you'll patch it again. Your tooth aches. Again. It's been nagging for weeks now, like a tiny devil thumping a drum inside your jaw. You press a finger to your cheek, feel the swelling, and sigh. There's no dentist, no soothing numbing gel, no gentle reminder to floss. You chew on the other side of your mouth now, carefully, slowly, and you pray, please just let it stop throbbing long enough to sleep tonight. Toothaches are common. They start early, too. Your neighbor's son is 7 and already missing half his teeth. Between the coarse bread that acts like sandpaper and the questionable water supply, dental hygiene is a theoretical concept. Brushing historians still argue whether peasants used twigs, frayed cloth, or nothing at all. Some say ashes or crushed herbs were rubbed on the teeth. Others think people just waited for the tooth to fall out or be yanked. You once saw a man tie a string around his molar, loop the other end to a cart, and have someone slap the mule. It worked. He also passed out. Your own options are limited. The village healer, Agnes, might help. She's not trained exactly, but she's got a garden full of strange plants, 2 rabbits that she calls the boys, and a reputation for fixing things that priests won't touch. You hobble over to her hut, clutching your jaw. She's tending to a pot of something bubbling and vaguely green. Smells like garlic and wet socks. Promising. She peers at you with cloudy eyes and says, "Tooth demon." She calls every ailment a demon. The trick is getting her to tell you which one. She takes a spoonful of mashed nettles, adds some crushed sage, and hands you a rag soaked in the mixture. Chew this. On the bad side. You do. It burns, and tastes like old cabbage. But weirdly it helps. A little. Maybe. Then she hands you a small dry toad wrapped in string and tells you to wear it around your neck. You blink. She insists. You leave her cottage smelling like a salad and wearing a dead amphibian like a necklace. You feel ridiculous, but the ache is down to a dull throb. You'll take it. Later that night by the fire, your child asks why you're wearing a frog. You say it's for the demon. They nod solemnly. No further questions. Medicine in your world is part faith, part folklore, part sheer luck. The physician, if one ever rolls through the village, is usually a man in robes with a sharp nose and a collection of leashes. He speaks Latin and rarely stays long. You remember one who gave a man chicken fat to drink for a fever. He died. The fever, that is. The man hung on. Most times you rely on what's close. Boiled willow bark for pain, a poultice of comfrey for wounds, mint for stomach cramps, and the occasional prayer whispered to Saint Apollonia, patroness of dental woes. Surgery, that's a word loaded with danger. If a bone breaks, you splint it with sticks and hope. If something festers, you lance it. If something bleeds, you press moss or cobwebs into the wound. Moss works surprisingly well. Cobwebs, well, they're there. You've seen a man with a broken leg scream into a stick while another man reset the bone with a pop that echoed like thunder. He passed out. Woke up. Said, "Thank you." Infections are everywhere. One scratch can turn into fever, into swelling, into something no one talks about out loud. Agnes has a salve for that. Smells like onions and fear. And then there's childbirth. You've seen it. More than once. Women bent in agony, surrounded by midwives and whispered prayers. Sometimes it ends in cries of joy, sometimes silence. And you bury another tiny blanket behind the chapel. The church says suffering is holy. That pain is part of God's design. You don't argue. But when someone dies from a simple cut, it's hard not to wonder. Still, people have their tricks. You remember when old Matthew got a fever and couldn't walk. He drank nothing but boiled nettle tea for 3 days, wrapped in a goose feather cloak, muttering in his sleep. On the 4th day, he got up and asked for bacon. That's what passes for a miracle. And the body somehow endures. You've had coughs that lasted a month, bruises that turned green blisters from tools that should have broken skin, and yet here you are, still breathing, still working. That evening, your jaw flares again. You sit by the fire and chew on a clove, one of the few spices that wandered through the village on a merchant's back. It numbs your gum, tastes like bitter hope. You stroke the toad necklace and mutter something sarcastic. Your spouse just smirks. You think about health in the manner they have imported herbs. Real physicians. Sometimes even books with diagrams of bodies. Do they know what's inside a person? Do they understand how lungs work or hearts? Maybe. But you're not them. You're a peasant. Your body is an instrument, not a temple. Still, you do your best to keep it going. You stretch your legs before bed, shake the dust from your tunic, and settle into the straw. Outside, the wind howls. Somewhere, a child coughs. Somewhere else, a fox shrieks like a soul escaping, and inside your skull, your tooth whispers again. But softer now. You think maybe the toad worked. Sunday. Finally. Not because it's restful, though you do get to skip plowing, but because it's your one guaranteed break from the relentless grind of dirt, sweat, and sore muscles. Today, your labor shifts from physical to spiritual. You're going to church. And yes, before you ask, it's mandatory. Miss a Sunday Mass, and you risk more than just side eyes from your neighbors. The priest might visit, and let's just say his sermons sound a little different when delivered in your front yard with a scowl. You put on your best clothes, which is still your only tunic, but you brush the straw off, smoothed out the worst wrinkles, and tied your belt with a little more flair than usual. You even dabbed a bit of rosemary water behind your ears. Fancy. Your spouse wears a wimple today, linen freshly rinsed, still a little damp. The kids are scrubbed, sort of. The littlest one has a streak of something on his cheek that won't come off. You decide it adds character. The path to the church is a dirt track lined with wildflowers, sheep droppings, and the occasional cart, rut deep enough to twist an ankle. You walk with your neighbors, quiet at first, then chatting in low tones. The gossip starts just past the blacksmith's hut. Apparently Martha's youngest was seen stealing eggs from the manor hen house. Again. And Walter, the miller's wife, is expecting. Again. Also, Agnes might be a witch again. Small talk in your world isn't about the weather. It's about people, their scandals, their secrets, their sins. The priest says gossip is a sin too, but conveniently it's the most entertaining one. The church appears around the bend, a squat stone building with a wooden bell tower that leans like it's tired of judging you. Moss grows up the walls. The door groans like an old man whenever it swings open. The inside smells of incense wax and wet wool. You take your seat on a cold wooden bench. No cushions, no backrest, just you, your spine, and the promise of salvation. Mass is delivered in Latin. You don't understand Latin. Most of the village doesn't, but the rhythm is familiar, and there's comfort in repetition. You know when to kneel, when to stand, when to bow your head. You mumble the right sounds, let your mind wander, and think about dinner. The priest, Father Bartholomew, is in full vestments. He looks like a walking curtain. His voice echoes off the stone walls, and even when you can't understand the words, you feel their weight. Today's sermon is about humility. Of course it is. It's always about humility, obedience, or punishment. Occasionally, joy, but mostly punishment. The fear of hell is as real as the mud on your boots. It's not a concept, it's a destination you're desperately trying to avoid. You've seen paintings of it, demons with pitchforks, flamed sinners hanging by their tongues. Terrifying stuff. Perfect motivation for behaving. Still, there's comfort in ritual. You light a candle, you cross yourself, you kneel and pray not just for yourself, but for rain for your spouse's bad cough, for the cow to stop limping, for the lice to move to someone else's bed. After Mass, everyone spills out into the yard. The gossip resumes. You stand around with your neighbors. Someone mentions that the miller shorted them on flour again. Someone else mutters about the steward's new boots. Suspiciously fine leather. You nod, but your ears are tuned elsewhere. See, church isn't just for worship. It's for information. Who's sick? Who's courting? Who's been seen whispering behind barns? Your community has no paper, no posters, no town crier. This is the newsstand, and it's alive with murmurs. You learn that someone found a coin in the stream, that the widow next door has been seeing a traveling tanner, that the blacksmith's apprentice got drunk on mead and fell in the pond. Again. You chuckle, sip your weak ale, and try not to stare at the manor folk who arrived on horseback and left halfway through the sermon. The priest didn't scold them. He never does. Back home, you warm leftovers over the fire and feel strangely full. Not from the food, your stew is still mostly onions, but from the feeling of knowing, being part of the flow, existing within something larger than just you and your aching feet. Religion weaves through every part of your life. Birth baptized, marriage blessed, death consecrated. Even your fields are sprinkled with holy water before planting. Just in case. You wear a wooden cross around your neck. It's simple, carved by your spouse, smoothed by time and fingers. It hangs next to your toad amulet. Divine protection and folk magic, why not both? At bedtime, you whisper a prayer. It's half Latin, half your own invention. You ask for strength, for health, for rain, but not too much, for peace, but not boredom, for your spouse's cough to ease, for your child's fever to break, for that tooth to stop humming in your jaw. The candle flickers low. You breathe slowly. Somewhere out in the dark, the bell tower creaks again. It's just the wind, probably. You roll over, pull the scratchy blanket higher, and fall asleep with Latin words in your ears and village secrets in your dreams. It starts with a glance. Maybe a smile. Maybe just a longer than necessary look while you're hauling a bucket of turnips or chasing a goose with questionable morals. Love for you doesn't begin with poetry or candlelight. It begins with availability, then comes proximity. And if you're lucky, affection. Courtship in your world is practical. Romantic occasionally. But mostly it's a negotiation between family's assets and the constant pressure of survival. You spot her at the village well. She's filling 2 pails at once, arms steady, eyes focused. There's a streak of soot on her cheek from the hearth. She's humming under her breath. It's not a song you know, but it makes your chest tighten anyway. You don't say anything right away. You keep hauling your own bucket, pretending not to stare. But your mind is already racing. What's her father like? Does she have land? Can she milk a goat without swearing? Love isn't blind here. It's deeply nearsighted and squinting at your harvest. Eventually, you strike up a conversation about the rain, about the harvest, about how your cousin's pig got stuck in the mill race again. She laughs. A real one. And that's it. You're doomed. Next comes approval. Your family visits hers or vice versa. There are discussions over mugs of ale. The priest might be consulted. So might the steward if there's any entanglement of land or obligation. And yes, if you're a villain, you may need the Lord's permission to marry. That's right, he can say no. Historians still debate how often lords actually blocked marriages, but the power was real. Another reminder that your personal life comes with legal strings attached. If both families agree and the Lord doesn't object, you're betrothed. There's usually a feast modest with dried apples and weak wine and a ceremony at the church. Rings are rare. Gifts might include a blanket, a loaf of bread, or a small silver coin. If someone's truly generous, you might get a chicken. The actual wedding is a blur. A priest mumbles Latin, you hold hands, there's maybe a kiss. Maybe. Don't be scandalous. Then it's official. You're no longer just 2 people who made eye contact over a basket of turnips. You're married, a unit, a survival alliance with shared back pain. Marriage brings its own kind of learning curve. You share everything: straw, bed, firewood, chores, gossip. Arguments are quick and sharp, often about livestock. Or the children. Or who forgot to plug the roof hole before it rained directly into the soup pot. Still, there are moments. A hand held under the table. A shared smile when your child says something absurd. A shoulder to lean on when the fever comes and doesn't leave for days. Children, by the way, arrive fast. There's no birth control. There are herbs, of course, certain teas and roots, but nothing reliable. You take your chances, and those chances multiply quickly. You know families with 12 kids. You also know families who lost half of them by age 5. You name your firstborn after a saint or maybe a relative. Sometimes both. Other times, you just pick something practical, like Adam or Joan. There's a child in the next village named Radish, though you suspect that was a misunderstanding during the baptism. Babies are swaddled tightly and strapped to your back as you work. Toddlers learn fast how to stay away from the fire, how to chase a chicken without tripping, how to listen for the tone in your voice that means danger. They wear tunics like yours, just smaller and constantly stained. Diapers, not exactly. More like cloths and prayers. You feed them gruel. You tell them stories by the hearth tales of foxes that talk and saints that glow in the dark. You watch their eyes widen. You hope they survive the winter. Marriage is work. Love is a luxury that sometimes grows in the cracks between chores. You may not have whispered sweet nothings in a moonlit orchard, but you did build a fence together. You survived a famine side by side. You buried a child, then leaned into each other like broken doors on the same hinge. And yes, sometimes there's joy. A dance at the midsummer festival spinning in circles until you both fall down laughing. A stolen kiss behind the haystack, a game of stones and riddles when the rain won't stop and the pigs won't shut up. You might even sing together badly while mashing beans in a pot. It's not much, but it's yours. Still, love doesn't always last. Sometimes marriages are arranged and cold. Sometimes they're rough, filled with silence and stiff backs turned to each other. And sometimes someone just leaves. It happens. Quietly. Without legal papers. Just one less bowl at supper. Divorce, huh? No, not without a bishop, a pile of money, and several compelling reasons, including the devil himself. You're better off staying quiet and growing old. But when love does work, it's a kind of magic more powerful than any saint's relic. You see it in the way she hums while stitching a tear in your cloak. The way he limps home from the field, but still smiles at the sight of your face. You lie together at night, your child breathing softly between you, the fire flickering shadows on the thatch above. No poetry, no roses, just two peasants and peace. You feel it first in the air. It's too still, too quiet. The breeze has a sour edge to it. You walk through the garden and notice that the leaves droop more than usual. The cabbage is struggling. The beets are soft and pale. Then the rumors begin. Someone in the next village lost half their barley to a rot that crept in overnight. A shepherd in the hills says his sheep are starving, nothing but brittle grass left. You see birds circling the fields like they're waiting for something to die. The harvest is failing. Again, you dig your fingers into the soil and find dust, crumbling lifeless. Last year it was rain too much too long. This year it's dryness. Or maybe wind, or maybe bad luck. Historians still argue how much of medieval famine was weather, how much was disease, how much was human error, overworked land, poor planning, blind faith in routine. You just know your stomach has started to shrink again. Your spouse says not to worry yet, there's still time. Maybe the barley will recover. Maybe the root cellar has more turnips than you thought. But you've seen this pattern before. The slow, creeping hunger, the way people begin to look around, not at each other, but at what each other has. By the second week of watching your crops wither, rationing begins. You cut the bread thinner. The stew becomes more water than substance. You find yourself chewing slower, hoping it'll trick your body into feeling full. You go foraging. You know the woods. You know which leaves can be brewed into bitter teas and which mushrooms might kill you before sundown. You dig up burdock root-picked dandelions, strip bark from trees. Agnes shows you how to boil it 3 times to get the bitterness out. It still tastes like sorrow. Your children ask when the next feast day is. You tell them soon. You lie. By the time August rolls around, the real panic begins. The granaries are nearly empty. The Lord has sealed his off. You hear whispers that he started weighing grain before distributing it, measuring the hunger of his peasants in handfuls and frowns. Someone suggests eating the seed grain the barley kept for next season's planting. It's a dangerous move. You do it anyway. You cry while boiling it. Your neighbor, old Thomas, remembers the last time this happened. He was a boy then barely 10. Says people were found in the forest chewing leather, boiling shoes, scraping moss off stones to make soup. You believe him? One morning you wake and there are no birds singing. You hear coughing but no talking. The village has grown quiet and slow. A child steals from the church garden. The priest doesn't punish him, just watches him run with a handful of carrots and closes the door. You chew on tree bark. Yes, actual tree bark. You slice it thin, boil it down, mix it with a little onion. It smells like firewood, tastes like paper, but it fills the belly at least for a while. You try roasting acorns. You soak them first, like Agnes said, to draw out the poison. They're still so bitter you gag on the first bite, but they stay down. The miller begins grinding chestnuts instead of grain. The bread is dense and dry, but it's something to chew. Your child asks if grass is food. You hesitate. Then you say, not yet. The animals grow thin. Your goat stops giving milk. The chickens stop laying eggs. One morning the cow doesn't get up. By nightfall, she's gone. You say a prayer. You also save the hide. You'll need it for something. You don't know what. By September, the desperation has settled into your bones. You've lost weight. Your spouse's hands tremble when they hold the ladle. Your children sleep more. You try to keep them distracted with songs, stories, chores. But their eyes look hollow. You recognize the look. You see it in the mirror, too. One night there's a knock on your door. It's Edith, the widow. She asks if you have any dried beans left. You don't. You invite her to sit by the fire anyway. She shares half a turnip. It's soft and tastes like dust. You eat it together in silence. You think about what hunger does, not just to the body, but to the mind. You forget what it feels like to be full. You dream of meals you never had: roast goose with garlic pies that smell like cinnamon bread that crumbles instead of breaking your teeth. Your child wakes in the night, crying. You think it's a nightmare. Then you realize they're just hungry. You hold them, rock them, whisper nonsense until they drift off again. A few days later, the rains finally come. Too late to save the crops, but enough to soften the earth, enough to breathe life into the wild herbs, the stream, the roots deep underground. You fill your buckets with clean water and cry into them. The worst of it passes, not with a celebration, but with a slow crawl back toward not starving. A few potatoes, some barley. The weak cow you thought wouldn't survive stands up one morning and moos at you like it's been offended. You laugh. For the first time in weeks. You survive. Not well, not whole. But still here. And when next season comes, you plant again. Because that's what you do. No matter how many times the hunger visits, you meet it with a shovel in one hand and a spoon in the other. And hope. Always hope. The rumors arrive before the carts. They always do. Whispers traded at the well. Nervous glances across pews during Mass. A stranger passed through the village last week, said he'd seen whole towns emptied. Said he watched 3 monks drop dead mid-prayer. Said even the rats were fleeing. You laugh it off. Sort of. Then the bell tolls in the next town over, twice in one day. And then the cart rolls in. A rough wooden cart dragged by a horse with ribs poking out like knuckles. On it bodies, covered in cloth limbs stiff and poking out. The smell hits before the sight. You gag. Everyone does. The man leading the cart wears a scarf tied over his face. He doesn't speak, just rings a bell slowly as he moves past. It's here, the plague. And just like that, everything changes. You've seen illness before. Coughs, fevers, strange swellings. But this is different. Faster. Meaner. Agnes calls it the death that breathes. Says she saw a man fine in the morning, black-spotted and cold by nightfall. The first case in your village comes 3 days later. A girl, 9 years old. Played by the river, laughed, picked flowers. That evening, shivering, bleeding from the nose. By dawn, gone. Her mother screams loud enough to split the sky. The priest won't go near the house. No one will. Another follows. Then another. You don't understand it. No one does. People say it's God's punishment. Others say it's the air, the miasma, thick and foul. Some burn herbs in their doorways, hang garlic from rafters, wear pouches filled with sage and crushed rose petals. You do too. Anything to keep the smell, the fear out of your lungs. Historians still debate whether medieval folks really believed in airborne transmission or if the bad air theory was just a poetic attempt to explain the unexplainable. Either way, you avoid the wind. You start washing your hands more, not because you know why, but because your gut tells you to. Agnes boils vinegar and sprinkles it on the floor. She draws symbols with chalk. You don't question it. The Lord locks down the manor. No one in, no one out. A guard stands at the gate with a spear and a nervous twitch. He hasn't blinked in 2 hours. The church doors are nailed shut after Father Bartholomew falls ill. You heard the coughing through the walls. Then nothing. The door stays closed. You keep to your cottage. Your family eats in silence. No one jokes. No one sings. Even the goats are quiet. Then your neighbor coughs. You hear it through the wall, wet, ragged, relentless. You know what it means. You don't go over. You want to, but you don't. 2 days later, his wife is hammering boards over the door. One of your children wakes up warm, too warm. You place a hand on their forehead. Burning. You feel the sweat pooling under their neck, the shiver that doesn't stop. You sit by their side through the night whispering prayers, bargaining with saints. The toad charm doesn't work this time, but somehow miraculously, they recover. A week later, they're walking again, pale thinner but alive. You call them your little miracle. You cry in the garden so no one sees. Others aren't so lucky. The cart returns. You help this time. You cover your mouth, wrap your hands in cloth, and lift the bodies into the back. They're not strangers. They're friends, a cousin, a man who taught you to make fishing nets, a child who once gave you a flower for no reason. You walk behind the cart as it rolls toward the mass pit dug behind the chapel. There are no coffins, just linen dirt and silence. You don't know how many more it will take. The village is different now. The laughter's gone. The fields go untended. You can hear your own footsteps again. You find a black cat outside your door one morning. It stares at you unblinking. Some say cats carry the plague. Others say they ward it off. You feed it a scrap of fish. It stays. Agnes starts calling it doctor. You laugh. First time in days. There are theories, of course. The Jews poisoned the wells. The beggars brought it from the road. The stars aligned in some deadly pattern. The Pope sneezed in the wrong direction. Anything but the truth no one knows. No one is safe. Not the pious. Not the powerful. Not even the priests. The manor isn't spared either. The steward falls ill. So does one of the Lord's sons. You hear the weeping echo from the hilltop like thunder wrapped in grief. One night, you dream of a man in a long cloak-bird mask covering his face stuffed with herbs. He reaches for you. You wake up gasping. Plague doctors aren't real in your village. That's a city thing, a rich city thing. Here it's just you, some rosemary, and prayers. Weeks pass. Then suddenly it slows. Fewer coughs. No new deaths. The carts stop rolling. You don't celebrate. You just breathe. The silence that follows is thick and holy. You walk to the edge of the village and count the houses with doors, still closed shutters, still drawn. Too many. You plant new seeds. You sweep the dust from your doorstep. You tell your children to sing again. And when they do, it sounds like hope. You survived. Somehow. And now there is work to do. You need someone to blame. Not because it will fix anything. Nothing will bring back the girl with the yellow shawl or the baker who used to sing while kneading dough, but because your brain can't make peace with suffering that has no reason. You need a villain, someone to point at and say, there. That's why the world is burning. And so the whispering begins. It starts small. A comment from a red-faced man at the edge of the well. Strange how that family hasn't fallen ill. Another from an old woman near the church ruins. She doesn't cough. She never coughs. Suspicion in your world spreads faster than the plague. This time the target is Miriam. She lives alone, keeps a garden full of herbs that don't grow anywhere else. She talks to birds. Once someone said they saw her walking in the woods under a full moon. Alone. That's all it takes. They call her a witch. Agnes shakes her head when you bring it up. She's no witch, she mutters while stuffing yarrow into a pouch. She just keeps to herself and knows how to dry lavender properly. That's a crime now, but you hear the fear in her voice. The kind that knows too well what fear can do to a crowd. Soon others join the chorus. The Reeves' wife says her goat died after Miriam passed by her fence. A child swears he saw sparks fly from her fingers. Someone's bread failed to rise, and that apparently is her fault too. Witch hunts, you realize, are not about witches. They're about control. The priest, yes, a new one now, young and stern, gives a sermon about the dangers of ungodly practices. He doesn't name names. He doesn't need to. Everyone knows who he's talking about. 2 days later, the men gather. They knock on Miriam's door. She doesn't answer. They break it down. You watch from your cottage heart, thudding, not moving, not blinking. They drag her to the square. She screams once, then doesn't anymore. They tie her to the cart and ride out toward the river. You don't go. You just sit there, holding your child's hand a little tighter than usual. She doesn't come back. No one talks about her again. Except for Agnes, who leaves a bundle of rosemary on the edge of the riverbank the next morning. Quiet, unseen. But Miriam isn't the only one blamed. Some turn on the Jews. Not that there are any in your village, there haven't been for years. But stories travel. You hear about towns where Jewish families were rounded up and burned, accused of poisoning wells and cursing the air. Historians still debate how widespread these persecutions were in rural areas like yours. But the truth is, you've heard the stories. You've seen the hate in people's eyes. It doesn't need to be near to be real. Then the cats. Yes, cats. Someone says they're evil, that they whisper to each other, that they walk too close to the graveyard, that they know who will die next. It's nonsense, but someone remembers a bishop once said, cats were the devil's companions. That's good enough, and so the cat killing begins. At first it's 1 or 2, then dozens. You see boys dragging sacks toward the woods swinging clubs. The cat that used to sleep under your porch, black scruffy, missing a toe, is gone. Ironically, you start seeing more rats. Go figure. You don't join in, but you don't stop it either. Because saying nothing feels safer. You try to focus on the daily rhythm, fixing the fence, boiling what little barley you have left, wiping your child's nose, pulling weeds from the garden like they're sins trying to root themselves too deep. But the fear is still there, just shifted now. No longer fear of the plague. Fear of each other. Fear that someone might look at you and think, why haven't you gotten sick yet? You try not to speak too loudly. You try to blend in. Your spouse starts avoiding eye contact with Agnes. You scrub the toad charm from your necklace just in case. One afternoon, a man you've never seen walks into the village. He's dressed in brown. His boots are cracked. He carries a small leather-bound book and asks if there's a chapel nearby. When someone points to the ruined church, he smiles and says, shame. He talks about sin, about how God tests the faithful with plague, about how those who survive must be especially vigilant. He mentions witches. He stays the night at the manor. By morning, he's gone. But his words stay, and things get tighter. The new priest asks questions now about who still brews teas, about who still wears old charms, about who doesn't attend Sunday Mass even if they're coughing blood. Agnes stops talking. She doesn't stop healing, but she does it quieter now, at night, behind shutters. You still bring her bread sometimes, just enough to say thank you. Just enough to make sure she knows you're not one of them, but you don't linger. You've learned how fast fear moves, how fast it turns neighbors into enemies. There's no real safety anymore. Not from plague, not from hunger, and certainly not from people. So you keep your head down, you keep your voice low, and you pray not just for your health, but for your name to stay out of other people's mouths. You pay in chickens, sometimes eggs, sometimes a sack of oats or a cord of firewood if the weather's been kind, but mostly chickens. That's how your world works. You wake before dawn, put in a day's labor, breaking your back on fields someone else owns, and then when you're finally resting your heels near the hearth, a knock comes at the door. It's the steward. Again. He holds out a list. Your name is on it. So is a number how much you owe in tax. This time, it's 6 pence. You haven't seen 6 actual coins in months. So you offer the hen that just laid her 3rd egg this week. You were hoping to keep her through winter, but hope doesn't cover debt. He shrugs. Fine, he says, and leaves with the squawking bundle under his arm. You sigh. Not because you're surprised, but because that chicken had a name. You don't pay just one kind of tax. There's the tithe, of course, 10% of everything you grow or earn, owed to the church. You carry it to the church steps in a little sack. Barley, mostly. A few onions, once a wheel of cheese. The priest took it without smiling. Then there's the Harriet. When your father died, the Lord claimed his best ox. Said it was death duty. You called it theft. But not out loud. And the boon work extra labor days during planting and harvest. Not paid. Not optional. Oh, and don't forget tallage. That's a tax the Lord can call in at any time for any reason. Maybe he wants a new roof. Maybe his cousin is getting married. Maybe he just feels like it. You joke with your neighbors. Maybe next they'll tax the air. You all laugh. But it's not that funny. Some peasants try to keep track. Little bundles of sticks to mark debts, lines scratched in barn doors. But it gets confusing. What was owed, what was paid, what was forgiven. It's a blur. Even the steward seems confused sometimes. He just shrugs and says, "The Lord will know." Right. You look at your hands, rough, cracked, blistered. These are the hands that feed your family, and somehow they're always empty. You remember when you worked the Lord's field last month and sliced your palm open on a broken plow. It bled for hours. You wrapped it in moss and kept going. No thanks, no payment, just more work. And when you finally had your own bit of land to tend, the sky opened and ruined your seeds. You had to beg the reeve for replacements. He gave you half of what you needed and wrote it down as a debt. You laugh bitterly. "I'll pay you back in dreams," you said. He didn't laugh. Still, you try to find ways to stretch what you have. You hide extra onions in a hollow tree. You trade with neighbors under the table, barley for herbs, fish for wool, favors for quiet silence. But it's not just taxes, it's expectations. The church expects penance. The Lord expects obedience. The village expects you to keep your mouth shut and your head down. And if you fail, if you speak too loudly or miss a payment or just exist in the wrong way, you're shamed. Publicly. The stocks, the lash, the chapel steps. You once saw a man whipped for refusing to give up his last chicken. He said his wife was sick, needed the eggs. The steward didn't care. The man walked home with blood on his back and a silence that never quite lifted. You help when you can. You bring bread to the widow with no roof. You leave firewood outside the healer's door. You hold the neighbor's child when the cough gets bad. No one thanks you. No one needs to. It's what people do when the system above them forgets they're human. Historians still argue whether peasants were powerless under feudal lords or whether they had more agency than we assume. You'd argue both. You have no power, but you resist in tiny, invisible ways. You help, you hoard, you hide, you endure, even when everything feels like it's being taken from you, because they can take your wheat, your ox, your firewood, but they haven't taken your stubbornness. And that's something. That night, the wind rattles the shutters. You sit by the fire, scraping the last of the stew from the pot. It's thin, mostly broth, but it's warm. Your child leans against your arm, half asleep. You stroke their hair, watching the flames dance. Tomorrow, you'll owe more. Tomorrow, you'll give more. But tonight, you rest. Because even when the world demands everything, you still belong to yourself. Something rare happens tonight. You laugh, not a chuckle, not a tired exhale. A real laugh. It starts with a flatulence contest. You weren't planning on having one. No one plans these things. But someone, probably Walter, let one rip while reaching for the bread, and suddenly it's a full-blown event. Your child clutches their sides. Your spouse is wiping tears from their cheeks. Agnes, who's usually the serious one, nearly drops her tankard. It's ridiculous. It's human. And it reminds you this village knows how to live even when life tries its best to ruin everything. The truth is, medieval peasants didn't just work and suffer. They celebrated. Often. Loudly. And sometimes in truly bizarre ways. Take funerals, for example. Yes, funerals. You've been to several this season thanks to the plague and that one unfortunate hay cart accident. And yet every single one ends the same way with bread ale and stories. Laughter next to tears. Someone plays a lute. Someone tells a rude joke. The recently deceased would have approved. It's not disrespect. It's necessary. Because if you don't laugh after death, death wins. So you sing. Even if it's out of tune. Even if it's that same tired ballad about the knight who fell in love with a cow, a story no one admits to believing but everyone secretly enjoys. There's a festival coming up midsummer. You mark it on your mental calendar, counting the days like coins in a jar. It's one of the few events where you're expected to stop working. The Lord himself might even host a feast. Bread, cheese, roasted meat if the harvest looks good. You'll bring a pie or a turnip pretending to be one. There will be dancing, not delicate courtly stuff, no silk gloves or synchronized bows. Just stomping, spinning, sweaty joy. You and your neighbors in a clearing with someone banging on a drum and someone else playing a tune on a crooked wooden flute. Your feet will hurt. You won't care. The maypole will go up decorated with ribbons, flowers, and the occasional confused chicken. Children will race. Old men will boast. Young couples will disappear into the trees, pretending to look for herbs and returning with leaves in their hair and guilty grins. The fire will burn until morning, and you will feel for one night like life isn't just something to survive. It's something to celebrate. Even on normal days, joy sneaks in. You might find it in a warm patch of sun on your back, in the way fresh bread cracks open when it's hot, in the sound of frogs singing at dusk, like they've got something important to say. There's joy in storytelling. Every night, after the fire's low and your muscles are screaming, someone tells a tale. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your child who can't quite remember how the dragon lost its tail but insists it had something to do with a stolen onion. The stories are wild, messy, sometimes magical. Foxes that talk. Knights who sleep for 100 years. Skeletons who dance if you whistle the right tune. Historians have tried to piece together these oral traditions, but most of them were never written down. Just passed from mouth to mouth, heart to heart, like bread broken and shared. And sometimes the stories are real, like the time the Reeves goose stole a silver spoon, or when the traveling merchant sold magic beans that turned out to be regular beans, except one did grow oddly fast. You still have the stalk drying in your shed. Or when your neighbor claimed his wife turned into a badger at night. She left him, for the record. Not because she was a badger, because he was insufferable. Humor is the glue. It holds you together when nothing else can. It's the secret armor you wear under your tunic. Not chainmail, just a joke about goat flatulence whispered at the right moment. There's also music. Not refined, not polished, but raw and full of life. A single-string fiddle, a drum made from pigskin, a woman who sings with a voice like thunder. You gather in barns or fields and let the notes roll over you like clean rain. You clap, you stomp, you forget. And maybe for a moment you feel like you don't live under constant threat of famine, taxes, plague, and being scolded by a man in robes. Maybe you just feel human. Because even in this life, this hard, dirty, aching life, there is celebration, not in gold or castles, but in crumbs shared around the fire, in the warmth of a hand against yours, in the fart that made 3 generations laugh at once. And tonight, after the laughter dies down, after the fire turns to embers, after the last bit of stew is scraped from the pot and the children are asleep, you'll smile in the dark. Because sometimes joy is the most rebellious thing you can carry. It starts with a whisper, then a grumble, then a voice low and tired says, "Enough." And suddenly the air shifts, because when you spend your life bent over fields you don't own, paying taxes you can't afford, and burying children you didn't have enough food to save, eventually something inside you hardens. It doesn't happen all at once. Rebellion isn't born in a flash. It grows slowly like mold under damp straw. Quiet at first, then choking. One morning the steward demands double labor service, 2 days on the Lord's land instead of 1. He says it's because of the shortages. He doesn't explain what shortages. You don't ask. You nod. You leave. But later behind the cowshed you mutter, "To hell with that. Walter hears you." He nods. That evening 5 of you meet behind the old mill. You don't have swords. You don't have strategy. You have calloused hands, bruised dignity, and a shared sense of being done. This isn't just your village. Word spreads. Across the hills, past rivers carried by travelers and merchants and wandering priests who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. In Kent, in Essex, in Sussex, peasants are rising. Real ones. With pitchforks, hammers, clubs. Not to destroy, but to be heard. Historians call it the Peasants' Revolt, or 1381. But in your world it's just the breaking point. You don't talk about it openly, but you know the names. Wat Tyler, John Ball. You hear them whispered like saints in barns and alehouses. John Ball, the priest who dared say, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman?" You don't understand all the words, but the message is clear. God didn't make lords. Man did. That kind of talk can get you hanged, and yet you listen harder. In your village, things get tenser. The reeve has started walking with a stick like he's suddenly afraid. The steward's voice cracks when he calls the roll. You hear rumors, peasants marching toward London, burning tax records, demanding wages, holding up entire cities with nothing but fury and farming tools. You don't dream of castles. You dream of justice, of keeping what you grow, of raising your children without begging, of wearing a tunic that doesn't itch and not needing permission to love or live. One afternoon the blacksmith's son doesn't show up for his usual chores. Gone. Vanished. Rumor says he joined the rebels. You say nothing, but your heart thumps a little faster. Then one day it happens. The Lord raises the tax again. This time he sends soldiers to enforce it. Not just the steward. Armed men. With real swords. Real armor. They ride into the village like they own it. Because they do. And someone throws a rock. No one knows who. Maybe it was Walter. Maybe it was your child. Maybe it was you and you just can't remember. But the rock hits. The horse rears. The soldier falls. The crowd gasps. And that's when the shouting begins. Not words, just noise. Rage. A pitchfork appears. Then a hammer. Then a broom of all things wielded like a sword. You join in, not because you think you'll win, but because not joining feels like giving up your own spine. There's chaos. Shouting. One soldier runs. The other gets dragged from his horse and pelted with onions. It's not elegant, but it works. By nightfall, they're gone. And for a brief glowing moment, you're free. The village stands in stunned silence. Then someone cheers. You build a fire. You roast every last turnip and carrot you can find. Bread is passed hand to hand. Ale flows. Someone finds a fiddle. You sing until your voice cracks. You know it won't last. You know the Lord will send more men. That punishment will follow, that this right now is a stolen hour, but it's yours. The next morning you're back in the field. Because rebellion doesn't stop hunger. The soil still needs turning. The goats still need milking. You're still a parent, a worker, a human. But now your back is a little straighter, your eyes a little brighter. Because you dared, even if only for a day. Historians argue whether these revolts ever truly changed anything. Some say they were crushed too quickly. Others say they planted seeds of fairness, of rights, of a world less cruel. You don't know. But you remember the sound of the cheer when the soldier fled. You remember the taste of victory-flavored stew, even if it was just boiled barley and pride. And you remember the feeling, not of winning, but of rising, together. The cold arrives before the snow. It creeps in silently through the cracks in the wattle walls under the uneven door between your toes as you sleep. One morning, your breath fogs the air before you've even sat up. The fire's burned out. Again. Winter in your world is not a season, it's a siege. You rise slowly, joints stiff, every movement deliberate. The straw beneath you is damp and smells of old sweat and goat. You tug your cloak tighter, though it's threadbare and full of holes patched with patches. You glance at the hearth. No fire, no warmth, only ashes and memory. Your spouse is already up trying to coax a flame out of damp kindling. Your oldest child is wrapped in an old tunic 2 sizes too small. The little one whimpers in their sleep cheeks red from cold hair stiff with frost. Outside, the wind howls like a wounded animal. Inside you shiver. Food is low. You've known this was coming, of course. You stored what you could, dried beans, salted turnips, the last of the barley. But you had to eat something during the harvest weeks, and now the cupboard is optimistic. A few onions, a wedge of cheese so hard it could be used as a weapon. Maybe 2 apples, soft and spotted but still edible. Breakfast is a thin gruel. Again. You boil water, add a handful of oats, and stir it like you're casting a spell. It's warm, at least. That's something. You go to check on the animals. The goat is still alive, thank God. The chickens. Not so lucky. Something fox maybe got into the coop last week. Left only feathers and footprints. You didn't cry. You just stood there and let the cold bite your face. You patch the hole with branches and twine, pretending it'll help. You've sealed the windows with cloth and wax, blocked the chimney on windier days. Still, the cold seeps in. It always does. You spend your days inside now, huddled close to the hearth, mending clothes, carving wooden spoons, telling stories. The children get restless. They argue over sticks. They chase each other around the single room, bumping into things making you laugh, and then cry a little quietly when they're not looking. Sometimes you step outside just to remember what the sky looks like. It's gray, always gray, the kind of gray that drains the color from your thoughts. And the silence. It's not peaceful. It's waiting. Waiting for a thaw. Waiting for spring. Waiting to see who doesn't make it this year. Every village has its stories. The man who froze walking back from the woods. The woman who starved because she gave all her bread to her children. The baby who coughed for 3 days and then went still. You carry those stories like stones in your pocket. You try not to think about the stew. It's just broth now, root water and scraped onion. You add herbs when you have them, bark when you don't. Your spouse found a bone in the shed, cleaned it and dropped it in the pot like a prayer. It made the whole house smell like memory. You don't know where the dog went. You hope it's just hiding. You try to stretch the food. You try to stretch hope. You barter with neighbors' wool for dried beans, old boots for kindling. Once you gave away your wedding belt for 3 eggs and a promise. The eggs didn't hatch. The promise did. You heat stones by the fire and tuck them under the blankets. The children huddle around them like treasure. You teach them to breathe slow, to stay still, to listen for the drip of melting snow on the roof, the first sign of mercy. You get sick, everyone does. The cough starts slow, then sharpens. Your chest tightens, your nose runs. But you press on. You can't afford to be ill. There's no apothecary, just Agnes, who hands you a pouch of dried thyme and says, "Boil this. Don't ask what else is in it." You don't ask. You drink the tea. It tastes like moss and metal, but the warmth spreads. You cough less, a little, and somehow you keep going, because even in winter there's work. You mend the roof after a storm. You chop frozen branches for the fire. You trap rabbits poorly, but sometimes successfully. You sew patches on your spouse's cloak stitch by firelight, and then one morning, you hear it, a drip, soft, rhythmic, water melting off the roof. You step outside and see the first patch of brown poking through the snow, muddy, ugly, beautiful. Spring is still far away. But this is the beginning. You run back inside smiling. You hold your child close and whisper, "We made it through the worst part." They don't quite understand, but they feel it. They smile too. That night you light the fire with a bit of old wool and dry twigs. You share the last of the barley bread. You sit close. You whisper stories. And you listen to the thaw, not just of ice, of life. Because winter tried. But it didn't win. You're still here. The world doesn't change in a flash. It shifts in slow circles like the seasons, like the hands of your spouse, brushing flour off their apron like the wheel ruts in the muddy road that always leans slightly to the left. And so do you. You wake each morning not to glory, but to routine. Survival. That constant clumsy dance with hunger fatigue and the fragile balance of hope. And yet somehow you're still dancing. You hear your bones creak like the beams above your head. You feel the old bruises, the deep soreness of living a life without pillows, without softness. You tie your boots with hands that have been cut, burned, frozen, and yet still hold steady. You stir the fire. You touch your child's forehead. You brush the sleep from your eyes. And you listen to the silence, not the silence of despair, but of morning peace. The quiet just before the rooster remembers he exists. You know what you are. A peasant, not a hero, not a noble, just a name in a ledger, a body in a field, a soul weighed down by obligations. But you are more than that too. You are stubborn, you are clever. You have learned how to stretch meals, how to make boots from rags, how to read the sky without books, how to make a child laugh with nothing but a silly face and 2 fingers shaped like ears. You are the rhythm of the land. The heartbeat under the stone, the voice in the firelight telling a story about a goose that became a knight. And at night you dream. Not grand dreams. Not dreams of castles or silk or feasts with golden spoons. No, your dreams are quieter. A winter with enough firewood. A cow that lives another year. A child who never knows the taste of tree bark or the fear of plague. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had dreams, whether they had time to think, to hope, to want. But they weren't here. They didn't see you staring at the sky wondering what lies beyond the clouds. They didn't see you whispering to the stars, asking them to hold steady for one more season. You have dreams. You have fears too. That the Lord will raise taxes again, that the stew won't last, that the small wound on your foot won't heal, that Agnes will stop answering her door. But you also have belief. In the land, in your family, in the way spring always returns, even when you swear it never will. You believe in the small rituals that keep the world spinning, blessing the seed, whispering thanks to the hearth, touching the doorway 3 times before leaving, not because it does something, but because it feels like it might. You believe in saints and seasons. In the way your child's laugh echoes across a field, in the warmth of shared silence after a long day. You believe that maybe, just maybe tomorrow won't be worse. And when you lie down at night under that patched wool blanket, your back aching and your belly half full, you do not call yourself poor. You call yourself alive, and that in your world is the highest wealth. You close your eyes. The fire crackles. The wind rustles the thatch. Your spouse breathes softly beside you, and you sleep. with the quiet pride of someone who has fought the earth, the sky, and all the sharp teeth in between, and is still here to tell the tale. The night deepens. The fire fades to embers, casting faint red shadows on the stone walls. Your breath slows. The world grows softer. Outside, the wind no longer howls, it whispers. Through bare trees, over sleeping fields, across rooftops that remember every season, every storm, every silent prayer whispered beneath them. You shift under the blanket just slightly. The weight of the day lifts little by little. Your fingers relax. Your jaw unclenches. Your thoughts, once racing with memories of frost, famine, laughter, and lords, begin to float like smoke rising in the stillness. You think of the stars above your roof. Distant, cold, constant. You remember that moment in early spring when the first green shoot broke through the soil. How small it was. How brave. The rhythm of breath, the hush of dreams, the quiet press of straw beneath you, all of it holds you now. And the world, once so loud with toil and worry, narrows to this, a soft heartbeat. A flicker of fire, the echo of an old song sung long ago by someone just like you. Sleep comes slowly, gently. No need to fight it. Let it gather you in like a warm cloak after winter. Let it carry you far from the aches and weight of the day. You've survived plagues. You've walked through famine. You've stood under the gaze of lords and laughed anyway. Now you rest. Because even the strongest bones need stillness, and the morning, whenever it comes, can wait. Good night, traveler of time. Sweet dreams.